I'm Bobby Rink. I want to welcome you to Evening Upstairs at your McCracken County Public Library. Tonight's presenter will discuss minor league baseball from after the Civil War era to about 1960, emphasizing persons who impacted baseball in our region. Our speaker is a Paducah native. He has a bachelor's and master's from Murray State. He retired from Kentucky Department for Employment Services after 30 years, and he has owned interest in minor league baseball teams and helped organize 2 independent professional leagues. He's the author of the fascinating new title, Paducah's Native Baseball Team, and he's a member of the Society of American Baseball Research and the St. Louis Browns Historical Society. We're glad to have him tonight here with us. Glad to have you all. Let's welcome tonight's presenter, Mr. Randy Morgan.
Thank you. First thing I'll address is the question everybody asks me, why did you write this? The reason I did, I grew up hearing stories of the old Paducah Chiefs and the baseball teams here from my father and my grandfather that went way back to the first years, my grandfather did. And I heard about it, and I guess, something's part of your life, you just assume everybody knows about it. And then a few years ago, I realized a lot of people in town were completely unaware of it. So I decided, what I knew at least, I would get down in book form, so the word could be passed on to other generations, I guess, and to let people know what a rich baseball heritage Paducah has. It's fading away now because it's been over half a century since Paducah had a professional baseball team. But 20 or 30 years ago, you could go around to baseball parks and minor league parks all over the country, major league parks at Wrigley Field or wherever, and say something about Paducah, and everybody had a story about something that happened in the Kitty League. It was bush baseball at its bushest. There are a lot of mistakes in it, but some very, very good ball players came out of it. You could have staffed a couple, 3 major league baseball teams with the players that the league produced, a lot of whom played here in Paducah. Bobby said it starts after the Civil War. It's been said many people that the Civil War was a terrible thing that the country went through, but there were some good things that came from it, particularly medical advances in treating injuries and diseases, and baseball came from it. For the war, baseball was confined mainly to the very northeast, New England and New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania. But during the war, soldiers from there spread out all across the country, and what the country was then, and took the game with them and played. Someone tonight mentioned the fact that in the POW camps, the prisoners would play the guards after the Southern boys learned the game from the Northern ones. So it started like that, and right after the Civil War, Paducah had its first team. It wasn't a professional team. It wasn't organized in the sense that it was an organized league. But there were town teams, they were called, and the fellows from Paducah would play games against teams from the area, mostly up and down the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, because it was easier to go 75 miles up the river than it was 15 miles across land. But that was the situation through the 19th century for the most part. The book includes something on Barney Dreyfuss. He's Paducah's link to the Baseball Hall of Fame. Barney Dreyfuss immigrated to Paducah from Germany in, I think, about 1881, something like that, and went to work at a distillery here that his family owned, and learned the language, learned the game, and before a decade was out, he was owning baseball teams. Never played, but he was, I mean, never played much, but he did get his start here. And then he wound up in Pittsburgh, owned the Pittsburgh Pirates, and that's why he went into the Hall of Fame, because as an owner, he was instrumental in building Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, which was one of the first steel and concrete structures. And he also was the guiding force in establishing the World Series. So that's big. He left Paducah in the, I think, late 1880s, never lived here again, but he kept his ties here. He had family here. The Wiley family that used to own the Wiley's department store downtown, they were his family, and cousins or whatnot. And he was back in town frequently and helped Paducah on more than one occasion get a baseball team, keep a baseball team, or some other fashion that he could help. In 1897, interests from Nashville and Evansville were trying to put together a professional league in this country, this part of the country. They came to Paducah and Cairo, and then other towns east of here, said that if we could come up with ownership in Paducah, come up with a place to play, Paducah could have the franchise. A Paducah Baseball Association was formed got the ownership, got the money up front to establish a team. There were two streetcar companies in Paducah in 1897. There was People's Street Railway and Paducah Street. I get them mixed up, and I don't remember which ones went where. But one of them had a park in the Roland Town section of the city, out near the end of North 13th Street. The other one had built a park at Wallace Park, which I think everybody's familiar with, just west of Lone Oak Road between Buckner Lane and Alvin Barkley Drive. At the time, streetcar companies would build amusement parks at the end of their line that was far enough removed from town that it was not an easy walk for most people, so people would ride the streetcar to the park. And both of these companies had done that. One over in Roland Town, both of them put offers up to build a professional stadium. The company in the Roland Town area got the contract. The president of that line was the president of Paducah Baseball Association, so his company got the bid in 1897, and they built Ramona Park. It was a baseball field. They said it held 2,500 with another 1,000 or so in bleachers. Probably didn't. That's probably exaggerated. It was probably a pretty bare bones stadium. But the park itself had quite a bit of typical streetcar parks. It had a theater called the Casino Theater. Just about every one of them had a casino theater. Casino in 1900 or 1890s meant a place where a lot of activities are carried on. And so they tried to put that identity with their park, so it'd make it a popular place. Ramona Park was built, and Paducah opened its professional baseball season of 1897 at Ramona Park. There was a huge crowd. Actually, they opened the season in Cairo, and there was a huge crowd down the riverfront seeing the team off on the steamboat. And then a lot of people went with them. A lot went on another steamboat, and the IC Railroad ran a special train, but it cost $1 and for a round trip, and most people chose the steamboat because it's quite a bit less. 1897 year got off in Paducah, and Cairo got off real good. The rest of the league had some people problems, and the largest towns were Nashville and Evansville, and then Terre Haute probably, then Paducah, and Clarksville, Tennessee was in it, Owensboro, and then some smaller towns like Washington, Indiana. Nashville had the Centennial exhibition going at the time, and they had hoped that was drawing all kinds of people to Nashville, and they'd hoped that they would go to the ballpark, but it seems to have hurt baseball attendance instead of helped it. And it wasn't very far into the season when Nashville team folded, and they moved in mid-season to Henderson, Kentucky. For very long, Evansville also went under, and then a couple of others, and finally it was only Henderson, Paducah, and Cairo wanting to carry on after about middle of July or late July, something like that. You couldn't carry on with 3 teams, so they folded. And started looking for an opportunity to get back into a professional baseball league. Barney Dreyfuss came to town to visit again and said a new league was forming and wanted Paducah to be in it. Again, a local group, including his cousins, became a part of the Paducah Baseball Association, and they've had a team. The new league was the Kentucky, Illinois, Tennessee League, KIT. For a short while, they added the word Indiana to it, the name Indiana. It was KITI, but in short order, then they removed it. I don't know if they thought it was too unwieldy or what, but it was the KIT League. And at the time, for some reason, in 1903, in that era, Americans liked to put feminine names to all kinds of organizations. You know, the Kansas something Texas Railroad was the Katy Line. This quickly became, the KIT became the Kitty League, and there were others. The South Atlantic League, still called the Sally League, and others, other leagues similar, whether they were names or not. Like there was the Pony League. I don't know if anybody remembers that. That was the Pennsylvania, Ontario, New York League, and others. The Mink, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas League. And so, but the Kitty League became what was called a Class D league. Between 1897 and 1903, when Paducah got its second team, a major advance had taken place in minor league baseball. The National Association of Professional Baseball Leagues was formed in 1901. What that did, it banded the minor leagues together in dealing with the major leagues, and the relations between them had not always been harmonious. The major leagues didn't care much about the Kitty League. They wouldn't have cared about them, but the higher minor leagues, some of them had aspirations of becoming major leagues, and so there was some antagonism between the big leagues and the top minor leagues. But in 1901, after the National Association was formed, that's what it went by for years after that, a certain protection was developed for the minor leagues. Contracts had to be honored by major leagues as well as other minor leagues. If they took players from a minor league when the year was over, they would have a draft. But then they had to compensate the minor league team if they signed one of their contract would be up at the end of the year. But they would be under contract to that team for the next year unless a higher classification league drafted them. And if they did that, then the old contract was voided. But after the National Association was formed, the lower classification team got a specified sum of money. Also, it was a great deal of protection for the players because the line A established minimum salaries at every level of baseball, and B, it said in their contract what their contracts had. It was a standard contract everybody signed, and so what they could not be made to do, because before somebody would own a baseball team, they'd sign a player to contract, and then they'd have him out there the next morning at 8 o'clock cleaning the stadium or mowing the grass or whatever, painting it or whatever they wanted done. This said they only played baseball. They couldn't do it. It was a great deal of protection for the players. It was restrictive to the players because you remember the reserve clause. All levels of baseball had the reserve clause until a few years ago when a court or somebody overturned it, an arbiter. A player was bound for all eternity to the team that held his contract, unless he was drafted by hire. But anyway, it was still, it was restrictive to the players' movements, but it was a lot of safety for them, a lot of protections for them. 1903 season got off, and I will say one thing, that National Association agreement with the major leagues, the A, B, C, D classifications had been in place before, but this solidified them and established what the leagues were, basically, at A, B, C, or D level. A being the highest level, D being the lowest. They took the average population of the towns in each league and said the biggest ones are A, B, C, and D. Kitty League started and stayed D League. D leagues were also called state leagues, and that their names generally were names of states or combinations of states or about a state. Like you had the Evangeline League in Louisiana, of course. You had the Lone Star League in Texas, or the Big State League. But others were just simply states. Like just north of us was the Illinois, Indiana, Iowa League, the 3I League. There were others, the Alabama, Florida League and whatnot. But Kitty League was a typical state Class D league. 1903 season started. The other streetcar company had built a ballpark. It was Wallace Park was the name of it, at Wallace Park. Wallace Park was a little bit larger than the old Ramona Park in Rowlandtown. Had a little more in it, a lot more in it, really. It had a lake, had a 9-hole golf course with sand greens. It had a casino theater too, and it had pavilions for shows and dances, and even had a zoo. Not a real large one, but it was a zoo. The baseball park there was called Wallace Park, although later years they started calling it League Park. Now this is a football team, but I used the picture because it shows you the stands at Wallace Park. This would have been about where it's where St. Thomas More Church once was, where I think it's Oasis Christian Center today. On that corner is basically where the ballpark was. That right there, football team, is Paducah Chess, Checker, and Whist Club. It was a social club for young men. And they had their own baseball and football teams. And there were other outfits, and Paducah had the same thing. R.L. Culley was a clothing store downtown, and they had a baseball and football team too. And they drew good crowds. They played at Wallace Park in the fall. But first year, in 1903, the Kitty League was comprised of Cairo, Paducah, Clarksville, Jackson, Tennessee, Henderson, Hopkinsville, Owensboro, and Vincennes, Indiana. They got off to a good start, most of them, except some of the towns. I don't know why, but no matter what league you have, 6 or 7 towns will be doing well, and one will just for some reason it's not clicking. That happened in Owensboro. And I can't remember when, really early in the year, Owensboro threw in the towel, said they couldn't go any further. The league got together, and that gave them an odd number of teams, so they had to get rid of one. And the way they did that, the team that was farthest removed from the other because of travel cost was eliminated when one fell. So that was Vincennes. Vincennes, Indiana was dropped. They didn't like it, but they were. the year went on, and everybody finished. The rest of them finished pretty healthily. And Paducah finished that year in 5th place, first year in the Kitty League, with a 47-59 record. Good for 5th place. I wanted to pause 1 minute. People sometimes ask, what was Paducah's teams called then? What were their names, nicknames? Well, in the 1890s and early 1900s, you had a sports team, you didn't give it a nickname. Other people did, but you didn't. If you were a college football or basketball team, well, there weren't many basketball teams in 1890, some were, or a baseball team, or with a pro or college, you were just the Paducah team was the Paducahs. Or everybody chose their color, and they may have been the Grays or whatever they were that year. They changed year to year. But people would, in the stands, go Grays or Paducahs, or the newspapers refer to them as Paducah Lads or Paducah Boys or something like that. And then the fans began to develop names, either off of the color or just something that was significant about the town. In Paducah, well, also depended on whether you were at home or on the road. If you're on the road, it was a rather derogatory name. If you were at home, it was a very positive name. Paducah teams, being the very name of the town, very early were called the Indians. Their fans called them our Indians. They'd call them our boys, our lads, or sometimes our Indians, or sometimes they were the Paddies or the Padukes, sometimes the Braves or Chiefs or whatever. But people in Paducah really liked the Indian idea. They went on the road, they were the river rats, and they were all kinds of other things. When Cairo came in, they were, the Paducah fans would call them the wharf varmints, the seepwaters, and the swamplands, and called them the Coochie Coochies once. I have no idea why they were the Coochie Coochies, but they gave them those names, and they changed from during the season. The people would start calling them other names. Just was something that passed through the stands, and newspapers picked it up. People enjoyed it. 1904, teams were back, and the second season started, and Paducah won its first championship. Finished the year with a 73-48 record, and won the pennant. They got it, won the flag, as they call it. It was a big for here, the end of that Venetian blind, I guess, that flew in the next year under the American flag at the flagpole. They won the pennant, and it was quite a finish, and the Paducah fans really got into it. And crowds were big out at Wallace Park, because with 17 games to go, they were 8 games behind. And they just started winning, and it helped that Cairo lost 15 of their last 17. And so they wound up finishing the season 1 game ahead of Cairo. And over in Cairo, they called their team the Egyptians because of Little Egypt, or the Pharaohs, or the Pyramids, or something like that. That was real popular over there. In 1905, Paducah won again, and crowds here were exceedingly high. They were just opening the gates, people were flooding into the stadium, and word was getting around. The Southern Association nearest was an A league, top minor league. They had Nashville, Memphis, Little Rock, New Orleans, Birmingham, Atlanta. They got word of it and sent a feeler to Paducah, would you like to be in our league? And of course everybody got excited over that. I don't think, looking at it from 100 years later, that it was possible. I think there was some political stuff going on in the Southern Association, and they wanted to use Paducah as a potential place to go. But in 1905, yellow fever epidemic struck started in New Orleans and came up the river all the way to Cairo and Paducah and St. Louis. The quarantine was imposed in New Orleans and Shreveport. They thought it would happen. Of course, Memphis, this is not the time that Memphis population, fell 90%. This is another time. And they thought they may have to quarantine Memphis, but I don't think they did. And so Paducah was called, was offered for consideration for either New Orleans or Shreveport to move to Paducah at least for the year and give the city a trial as to how they could draw. Well, yellow fever was affecting this area too. Now, it's a long story that I won't go into, but the Kitty League, it was in danger of breaking up at that time, so Paducah people would have accepted the Southern League offer, Southern Association offer, if it had come, but it didn't. And then the Kitty League wound up, New Orleans went to Chattanooga for the end of the year, Meridian, and Shreveport finished the year at Chattanooga. Cairo was about to be quarantined, and Paducah wasn't, but you can imagine, even though there's no quarantine in place, people were afraid to go to the ballpark with yellow fever spreading. So they just called the season off in August. The Cotton States League did the same thing down in Arkansas and Mississippi. Anyway, that was the 1905, 1906. It got going again. They finished the 1906 year and they didn't come back. There were some of the problems that kept reoccurring. One of them was Sunday baseball. At Cairo and Vincennes, Indiana, there was no question. They could play baseball on Sunday. Every place south of the Ohio River, it was questionable. And most of them, the answer was no. Paducah, for a year or so, they played. They were threatened with jail. Barney Dreyfus came in town and said, "Don't worry about it." He said, "When I was running a team here, we were threatened with that." He said, "I got a slick lawyer and got out of it." So I don't know if this team had a slick lawyer or not, but they finally got out of it and were allowed to play on Sunday. One way they said, they went to court and they said that they had talked to the players and the players agreed to play for free on Sunday. You could play baseball on Sunday. You just couldn't pay somebody to do it or charge admission. And so they said, the team told the court, the players said they'd play for free on Sunday and we'll give the money to charity. Well, somebody else pointed out after the season was over that a grateful management paid the players twice for Monday. But anyway, that was a problem. It was an ongoing problem into the 1930s, actually. Paducah finally, after the 1905-06, they were able to play on Sunday. But about the only team around here that was, except for Henderson finally. And other teams, Hopkinsville, Union City, sometimes would, if Paducah was on the road, they would come here and play their Sunday home game. Figure a little crowd in Paducah is better than none. But anyway, after the 1906 season, pretty much faded away. That Sunday problem was just, they just couldn't overcome it. You can imagine people work jobs usually 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Sunday was the only day they had free. And if you couldn't play on Sunday, there was your crowds. Here's the 1904 team. I show that to you. Johnny Ray is the man in the civilian clothes, was the manager of that team. There's the 1913 team I'm getting to here in a minute. There was another championship team. 1910, the league was reformed. The towns went 3 or 4 years without baseball, and there was a demand to reform it, and they did. 1910, it started with I think they started with 6 teams. I may be wrong about that, but they did start the league, and then the next year it got up to 8 teams and lasted pretty much straight through. Although in 1913 there, Paducah had another great year when they won the tournament. They won. They had an 80-47 record that year. Finished 1 game ahead of Clarksville, but. In 1916, there was a controversy that wouldn't go away within the league itself, and that was the distribution of gate receipts. The smaller towns wanted the teams to share the gate 50-50, visitors and home, and they did. From the time the league started up until through the teens, they shared it 50-50. And what they did, the 3 summer holidays would have double hitters, Memorial Day, 4th, and Labor Day. And what they did they would take those receipts and pool them and then go to all the teams in the league, the 8 teams in the league. They would pool the 4 games and distribute it even, which kept the larger towns from having a financial advantage over the smaller towns. But Paducah and Cairo thought 50-50 was a little too much. What was common in baseball at the time tended to be more like 60-40. The home team kept 60, the visitors got 40. And at a league meeting for the 1916 season, Paducah said, I guess the bluff, the bluff said, we won't play if you're going to do it 50-50. They called their bluff. Paducah sat out the season and the league went on. And without Paducah. The next year was 1917. No baseball. Right, the war started. World War I is starting. And in the winter, when they would have been making the schedule and getting ready for spring training, they knew it was coming. And everybody knew it was coming, even though in 1916, I think, Woodrow Wilson had run on the platform. He kept us out of war. But everybody knew we were going in 1917. So 17 and 18, no minor league baseball at the lowest levels for the most part, because there were no players. They were all being drafted. After the war, in 1919 and 20 and 21, there was talk about reestablishing the league, and they wanted to get on it. But you know, the recession that followed World War I, most of the country rebounded from that in the early 20s, and 20s were known as the time of prosperity, except it was an uneven prosperity. In the rural South, it didn't come. The prosperity never came. And what the people at the time called the hard times. Hard times continued through the 20s. Now, Paducah was a bit of an island in this area, in that there was quite a bit of economic expansion in Paducah in the 20s, but still it's dependent on the area around it. And every time they would try to start a league in 1920, 21, people had trouble in the other towns getting the finances necessary to field a team. 22, it happened. They got it going again. They tried it. Let's see. They had the Kitty League this time was in Kentucky. You had Mayfield, Madisonville, Hopkinsville, Paducah, and Fulton. Tennessee, you had Trenton and Paris, and Cairo in Illinois. The season started. Paducah had a terrible team, and late in the year set a record for professional baseball, major or minor league, 27 consecutive losses. People at the other ballparks in the league were taking bets in the stand if Paducah would win again that year. But they did finally. They set a record, 27 straight. It was a it set all professional baseball in America record. And it was a Kitty League record until Jackson, Tennessee broke it in 1955 or 54 with 28 straight losses. But they finished 23. Terrible team. They finished the second half with an 8-50 record. It wasn't that bad the whole year, but that's the way they finished. Season ended in 23, and the baseball team got some rather bad news. That's a little bit ahead, but they were told Wallace Park was being converted to a residential subdivision and the ballpark would be torn down. The 24 season was coming up. Paducah had no ballpark. They were hoping they could get one more year in before they tore it down, but it didn't happen. And the Kitty League folded after that anyway. Had Paducah had a ballpark, they might have got into the Tri-State League because Jackson, Tennessee, and Dyersburg, another old Kitty League team, got in there. The Tri-State League was primarily North Mississippi, Tupelo and Corinth, and then Jonesboro and Blytheville, Arkansas, and then towns in West Tennessee. Could have done that maybe if they'd had the ballpark, but they didn't. Also, the Supreme Court of Kentucky ruled in 1924, 25, something like that, that the law against playing baseball on Sunday was valid. There was a semi-pro team in Bowling Green that had charged people to come in on a Sunday, and they were arrested. And the Supreme Court of Kentucky ruled that it was enforceable, and the governor of Kentucky at the time said from that point on it would be enforced. So if Wallace Park had still been up, they probably wouldn't have been able to play. Then, of course, 29 came and the crash, and in the 30s, minor league baseball, especially D leagues, just about went away. A few hung on. But in 1934, well, let me drop back a little bit to 1928. A man in Paducah was a druggist, B.B. Hook, Burley something Hook, I forgot, wasn't it? But he was a druggist, had a drugstore down on 3rd in Kentucky on the northwest corner. That building that went from 3 stories to 2 stories, that was his drugstore. And then later he had another one out around 17th and Broadway or somewhere. But he had put together amateur teams after the Paducah baseball team folded in the 20s. And in 27, 28, he built a ballpark. And if you look onto the right here, you can see just a little bit of it. He called it Hook Park. People in Paducah called it Hooks Park for the most part. I heard that all my life, Hooks Park. It was, but he called it Hook Park. It was bare bone facility. I'll tell you, it was not a comfortable place. You can see those stands; those are the good ones. And it gets more, at the end of the picture, it's worse. And he built more than a baseball park. He built he called it Hooks Arena, that was a indoor facility for boxing and wrestling. Both those drew big crowds then. And I say, I'm not about 5,000 seat arena, but it would hold hundreds. And they had boxing out there and wrestling. And he also built a pavilion where they held dances and stuff like that. Also built a tourist court, tourist cabins, after the Cobb Bridge opened, and even had living quarters out there. So he had quite a bit. And where it is on North 8th Street, about where the compost pile is, if you know where that is. That was where Hooks Park was. And That lasted until World War II, from 28 to World War II, when they tore it down and donated the materials for the war effort. In 1934, he wanted to get pro baseball back in Paducah. And he started working people in other towns. Frank Bassett had been the president of the Kitty Leagues from Hopkinsville before the war, before the Depression started. And he came on board, and they started looking for towns, and they found enough to start. Trying to think what those towns were. It was Paducah, Hopkinsville, Jackson, Union City, Lexington, Tennessee, and Portageville, Missouri. 6 of them. There's some changes that happened between Paducah's last pro team in mid-20s and 1935 when they started. One was the growth of the minor league baseball system. The baseball commissioner, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, hated 2 things: working agreements, minor league farm systems, and night baseball. 2 things he hated were of all his power that he had and did a lot, those were 2 things he couldn't stop. Frank Bassett agreed with him right down the line at the Kitty League level. Hated night baseball, and he hated working agreements with major leagues. Now, when I say the farm system, Paducah had working agreements with major league teams back since 1903, I guess, but it was on just a here and there basis. Paducah would not like been a farm team for, say, Cleveland or so. The Braves might have sent them somebody, and maybe the Tigers would have sent them somebody that they wanted to protect their contract and let them play. But the farm systems weren't really going. Branch Rickey changed that. He was general manager of the Cardinals in the 30s, and he began signing up teams exclusively for farm agreements. At one point, I think he had 29 teams in the 30s. And when they started in 1935, the Kitty League started up again. B.B. Hook wanted to get a Cardinal working agreement. And they weren't the gold mine they became later, really. The local teams still had to pay the players, but what they did, you could get the leads on good players that would be able to win in your league. They would send 2 or 3 men to you to be considered for a manager. You could pick one if you wanted, or if you had somebody else you wanted, you could do it. Then they would send maybe 10 or 15, 20 players, and you could pick through them. If you wanted to sign your own, half a dozen of your own, and then some of theirs, you could too. But the ones that you signed, they had the right for their contract if they sent them to you. B.B. Hook wanted a working relationship with the Cardinals as exclusive. And another thing that happened from the 20s to the mid-30s, teams now were choosing their own nicknames and marketing them. Before, they'd never tried to market them. And now when they realized Paducah Indians could sell stuff, said Paducah Indians on it, then they chose their own. And often it was one that the local people had called them all the years anyway, like the Paducah Indians. But in order to attract Cardinals' attention, he said in 1935 his team was going to be the Paducah Redbirds. And he didn't get the agreement. They signed with Union. Cardinals signed with Union City, and they were still the Greyhounds. But next year he changed back to Indians. And he did it through the 30s. They had an agreement with Pittsburgh and Cincinnati and Memphis Chicks. At the time, the high minor leagues, what now are AAA and AA, had their own minor league systems. They operated pretty independently of the major leagues. Some of them had their own spring training sites and everything. So he was a farm team of Pittsburgh and Cincinnati and Brooklyn for a while, and Memphis and maybe Nashville. Anyway, the 30s came and went, started. This is the 36 team here. 35 team, I don't have a picture. This is 36. I don't know. Right here, right there, that is Ben Tin Cup. Paducah baseball fans had some players they loved through the years. Early years was Harry Lloyd. He was given the honorific, I guess, chief. They called him chief. The only Paducah player of the Indians was ever called chief. Ben Tin Cup came in 37, and it was at a rough time because the season opened in May. When the flood went down in February, B.B. Hook's ballpark practically didn't exist anymore. He had to knock it down. He said he had the money to build a new ballpark, but he didn't have no money to build a new ballpark and operate a team. So he put word out, could somebody take the team if he'd build a ballpark? 3 men stepped up: Holland Bryan, Bill Meyer, and Mert Sloan. All stepped up and took over the team. B.B. Hook was still in the background. Ben Tin Cup was hired as manager. He was a Cherokee, T-I-N-C-U-P, Ben Tin Cup, and he had been a Major League Baseball player. Was known back then, everybody had a nickname. He was a Cherokee Ben, and he was also called the Millionaire Indian, but he wasn't. He owned a ranch in Oklahoma, and rumors got out that he had struck oil on it, and it didn't happen. But at this point, he had been managing in the minor leagues for 5 or 10 years after his big league career had ended. In those years, the minor leagues, every manager, nearly, there's some exceptions, was a playing manager. The last big leaguer, Pete Rose, didn't he do it for a while? But in the 30s, the big leagues did it too, because you had to save salary. If you had a 16, 17 man squad to start the year, your manager could play, that was one less salary. And so they had that. He came as a playing manager, and he was the second man that Paducah fans embraced enough to call chief. And they started after he was here 3 different seasons, not consecutively, but the people always wanted him back. And he was a good player too, and he excellent player. And but he was kind of welcomed into the group and called chief. And he was a good friend to Paducah. The fans liked him, and he liked them. Even after the years, he later went to the Yankees and was a coach, and he would still come in the off season and visit. And there'd be a big crowd downtown when he would come. People wanted to meet him, shake hands. But there he is, and that's the 36 team, and that's their road uniforms. Here's their home uniforms. That's Gordon Swope. Yeah, Gordon Swope was an all-star first base. He made the all-star first base that year. The swastika was, at the time, 20s and 30s, was I think a good luck charm. It was just everywhere. Today it's like, I guess you see the heart, I love something. And back then that was just a good luck charm. And B.B. Hook had it on all his teams. And that shows their bust too. That's a kind of rough accommodations. But they played through the 30s, and again, 40 was the last season for Paducah. The league tried it in 41 after the war had started. No, excuse me, they played 41. They played the 41 season. And then with the war starting in December 41, Paducah didn't even try it. The rest of them, some of them tried to make a 42 season, but they got into a few weeks, and then they had to fold because the players were all getting drafted and leaving. After the war, there's again, the 36 team. And now that right there, this is a 37 or 30, I think. Those are Holland Bryan and Mert Sloan and Bill Meyer. Vitt is the Cleveland manager there, and Bill Terry is the New York Giants manager. They came here and played a exhibition game before the season. Back then, when the teams traveled by train, you know, when they'd break camp in Florida, they'd play their way north. And that was just one of the games at Hook Park. It shows you Hook Park, too. Bill Terry was another good friend of Paducah. He was from Memphis. They called him Memphis Bill. And he helped Paducah through the years. There's the 38 team, the 39. This shows you the 40 schedule. I've included that because 8 teams, they played generally 126 game schedule. You've got 7 opponents. It's 18 teams with everybody, 9 home, 9 on road. And you can see most of them were 3-game series. Some, like down here, Paducah and Mayfield, they would change it, sometimes 2-game series, because they didn't overnight. And there's another one there. That shows you the bleachers at Hook Park. 1949, that January 23rd in the afternoon, 24th in the morning paper, Paducans opened their newspapers, and that's the headline they saw. Pro baseball comes back to Paducah after 8 long years. After the war, Brooks Stadium was built. It was a community-wide effort. They sold shares of stock for $10 each, and people bought them. They got Brooks Stadium built. Problem was there was no room in the Kitty League. In '46, the league was going to reestablish after the war. B.B. Hook went to the meeting, and he said the same thing. I can't build a ballpark and operate the team. Nobody stepped up this time, so he couldn't guarantee Paducah would have a ballpark. So the leagues formed without him, 8 teams. And when '49 came, they got the ballpark built. There was no room in the Kitty League. It was 8 teams. National Association would not authorize any league to have more than 8 teams. 8 was it. Now there were a couple. Had 10 for a temporary thing, but it was just temporary. 8-team league is perfect for scheduling. You've got 2 groups of 4, 4 groups of 2. And that was what the major leagues was, and they wouldn't allow minor leagues to go over that. So north of here was the Illinois State League, had teams from Mattoon down to Marion. Next year, they changed the name to Mississippi Ohio Valley League and offered Paducah a spot. And since Kitty League had no openings, they took it and played in that league for 2 years until Cairo dropped out of the Kitty League. Cairo had, you know, it's a sad state of affairs over there. When the league started, it was the largest town in Illinois, south of Belleville, and was most of the years. Paducah and Cairo were the 2 biggest towns in the league, the Kitty League. And but by 50, the decline had set in. In 51, they lost their team. Paducah was offered the spot, and they took it. Now, for the future of baseball in Paducah, some people would say it was a bad move because the Mississippi Ohio Valley League is now the Midwest League. Class A league operating today. And if Paducah had held their franchise, would we have a Midwest League team now and never have lost one? Probably not, because they wanted to get back in the Kitty League because of travel considerations. And the league was drifting northward. They were adding teams in Wisconsin and Michigan, and Paducah it was a great opportunity, but they just couldn't do it. So they were back in the Kitty League, and the Kitty League lasted until '55. 1954, the life in this area has changed forever in November. KFVS Channel 12 signed on the air television. For the first time, Paducah people could get, and most of the Kitty League, could get a reliable TV signal. And attendance fell, movie theaters closed, all kinds of organizations, were struck. That wasn't the only thing. Part of it, Kitty League had not kept up with the times as changing in minor leagues. Teams, most of them weren't being operated efficiently. Paducah was, and after the 55 season, Paducah wanted to continue and look for another place to go, but they couldn't find any place. 57, they were offered a shot at the 3I League, but it too had drifted north like the Midwest League into Nebraska and Minnesota, and the travel was just prohibitive. So they were back with nowhere to go. Here's a couple of years of the Chiefs. That's the 50 Chiefs. That's at Brooks Stadium. Some of these here are, it's Mel Ivey up here next to the right on the top. He was another local favorite from Paducah. He was from up in Illinois somewhere, and he helped me write the book, gave me a lot of information. I was honored to be a pallbearer at his funeral. And Hal Lowry is on that team, over on the top row, second to the left. He also gave me a lot of help. He was from up Farmington, Missouri. He wasn't from there, but he settled there, and he had a lot of stories about it. He lived in a rooming house on Jefferson Street downtown, and had to walk to the ballpark every day because he didn't have a car. But that's one of the latter teams. That shows you Pope Brooks and Ewing Hayden, who were instrumental in running the team its last years. That's the 51 infield. That's Bob Stanton on the left, was the playing manager. And that right there I included because I loved the place. That was the goal of where they wanted to get to. Now, you know where that is, don't you? That's Sportsman's Park on North Grand in St. Louis. And that's the way it looked in the 40s. It's amazing, isn't it, that I don't know where my pointer is, but it's amazing that you have houses here, and then beyond this one, there are more houses down there. It's amazing to me that people lived with a Major League Baseball park in their backyard. And that was after lights were up. Can you imagine?
It's still the same way in Chicago, Wrigley Field.
Yeah, but it's really not on the same block, is it?
Yeah.
Is it?
Taverns and stuff.
Yeah, taverns are, yeah. Yeah, but that's, by the time I remembered it in the 50s, the houses had pretty much been torn down. So that's the story of Paducah's minor league baseball team. It was started as a very popular place to be in Paducah, a great deal of enthusiasm, and in the last year there was too. They looked everywhere to find another team. They didn't want to stop. There's a long story, I don't have time to go into it, about it really wasn't necessary that the Kitty League die, but ineptitude from some other cities caused it to. But in Paducah, they wanted to carry on, and unfortunately, there was no league to play in.